Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something that's pretty crucial in recovery, self-acceptance.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Yeah, and it's a topic that comes up a lot in Narcotics Anonymous literature. And today we're going to be looking at specifically excerpts from, it's called IP19 self-acceptance.pdf. So
Okay.
that's our source material. And
Love it.
yeah, it's a good one.
A lot of good stuff in there.
There's a lot of really powerful insights in this document, and I
Yeah.
think it's going to be a really valuable deep dive for anyone in recovery who's
Sure.
kind of struggling with this concept or wants to learn more about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's something we all deal with.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Every day.
So one of the things that this document kind of starts out with is that it says a lack of self-acceptance is a common problem for recovering addicts and can be really sneaky hard to spot. And I think that's such an interesting point because,
It is.
a lot of times we think of self-acceptance as something that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Either we accept ourselves or we don't. But this document is saying it can be much more subtle than that.
It really can. Yeah, it can kind of sneak up on you.
Yeah.
You're not even aware of it a lot of times. And I think the document makes a good point when it talks about how this lack of self-acceptance, it can really manifest in a lot of different ways.
Right.
It's not always just like this blatant self-hatred.
Yeah.
It can show up as like irritability,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
or discontentment, even depression.
Right.
And, a lot of times we tend to focus on external factors
Mm-hmm.
when we're feeling those things, like, oh, it's my job, or it's my
Right.
relationship, or it's this situation that's making me feel this way. But what the document's getting at is that a lot of times the real struggle is internal.
It's that lack of self-acceptance that's driving a lot of these other feelings.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so that's why it's so important to really kind of dig deep and examine this, and see if maybe that's playing a role in some of the challenges we're facing in recovery.
For sure. I mean, if you can't accept yourself, how can you accept anything else?
That's such a good point.
Yeah. It's like the foundation.
It is. Yeah, it's like the foundation.
And everything.
You have to start there.
For sure. So the document goes on to talk about kind of what this lack of self-acceptance might have looked like before recovery. And it talks about, spending years in self-rejection, trying to be someone we're not. And I think that's something that a lot of us can probably relate to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like especially before we came into recovery.
Especially before recovery. Yeah, I mean, think about it. We were, you know, living in this world where we were constantly trying to fit in.
Yeah.
We were trying to meet other people's expectations.
Mm-hmm.
We were trying to be what we thought other people wanted us to be. And that's a recipe for disaster when it comes to self-acceptance because you're always going to be coming up short,
You're never going to measure up to that ideal.
Right. And so I think this is where we start to see that connection between, a lack of self-acceptance and addiction, because a lot of times we turn to drugs and alcohol as a way to numb out those feelings of inadequacy.
Absolutely. It's like we're trying to escape from ourselves.
Right.
Because we can't stand to be who we are.
Yeah.
And so we turn to substances to kind of create this false sense of self-esteem.
Right.
To feel okay about ourselves.
Or to fit in or to be accepted.
Yeah, to be accepted by others because we can't accept ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And that's where that cycle of addiction really starts to take hold,
Exactly.
And the document talks about how this fear of rejection that comes with a lack of self-acceptance can really make us push others away before they even have a chance to hurt us.
Yeah, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy,
Right, it is.
We're so afraid of being rejected that we end up sabotaging our relationships before they even have a chance to get off the ground.
Right. And so
It's crazy when you think about it. It is.
we're creating the very thing we're afraid of.
Yeah, it's like we're pushing people away and then we're using that as evidence to support our belief that we're not worthy of love and connection.
Exactly.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is a vicious cycle. And
It's all rooted in this lack of self-acceptance.
right. And so the question is, how do we break free from that cycle? How do we start to cultivate self-acceptance in recovery?
Well, that's where the 12 steps come in.
Right.
I mean, the 12 steps are all about, learning to accept ourselves for who we are and to live a life that's based on honesty and integrity.
Right.
And so, when we start working the steps,
Mm-hmm.
we begin to see that. We don't have to be perfect
Mm-hmm.
to be worthy of love and acceptance.
Right.
We can accept ourselves,
Yeah.
even with all our flaws and all our mistakes.
And that's really the beginning of the journey,
Yeah.
It's that acceptance that allows us to start moving forward. So one of the things that the document talks about is that the first step towards self-acceptance is accepting our addiction,
Mm.
And I think that could be a really tough one for people, because
yeah, absolutely.
for so long, our addiction was our identity.
It was everything,
It was everything.
It was who we were.
Yeah.
It was how we defined ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so to let go of that,
Right.
say, okay, I'm not my addiction,
Yeah.
that can be a really scary thing.
It could be really scary. Yeah, because it's like, what are we left with then?
Exactly.
If we're not our addiction, who are we?
Right.
And that's where the 12 steps come in, to help us answer that question, to help us discover who we are beyond our addiction.
That's a really powerful way to put it.
Yeah. And so, when we start working the steps, we start to see that our addiction is not who we are. It's a disease.
Yeah, it's something we have.
It's something we have.
It's not who we are.
Right. And that's a really important distinction to make.
It is.
Because it allows us to separate ourselves from our addiction.
Yeah.
And to start seeing ourselves as worthy of recovery.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I love about NA is that it's a place where we're accepted for who we are.
Yeah.
We don't have to pretend to be anything we're not.
Right.
We can just come as we are and be accepted.
And that's so powerful.
It is.
Because when we feel accepted, we can start to accept ourselves.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really the key
Yeah.
to breaking free from that cycle of addiction.
It is.
And finding that self-acceptance that we're looking for.
I couldn't agree more.
So the document goes on to talk about this concept of a higher power.
Okay.
And how that plays a role in self-acceptance.
Right.
And I think this is something that can be a little bit tricky for people new to the program.
It can be.
Yeah.
Because...
Especially if they've never really had any kind of spiritual beliefs before.
Yeah.
Or if they've had negative experiences with religion in the past.
Exactly.
So it can be a little bit intimidating to hear this talk about a higher power.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to understand that the higher power doesn't have to be anything specific.
No. It doesn't have to be a god.
It could be whatever gives you strength.
Yeah, it can be whatever you believe in that's greater than yourself.
It could be nature.
Yeah.
It could be the fellowship itself.
Absolutely.
It could be music.
Yeah.
It could be art.
Right.
It could be anything.
As long as it gives you that sense of connection to something bigger than yourself.
Yeah. And I think that's really the key.
It is.
It's about finding that source of strength that can help us to get out of our own heads and to start seeing ourselves in a more positive light.
Exactly.
Because when we're connected to something bigger than ourselves, we're not so focused on our own flaws and our own shortcomings.
Right.
We can start to see the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And we can start to see ourselves as part of something larger than ourselves.
Absolutely.
Which can be really helpful in terms of self-acceptance.
It is.
Because it takes the pressure off of us to be perfect.
Right.
We
don't have to be perfect.
We're just part of this bigger thing.
Yeah.
And
that's okay.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really important concept to understand.
It is.
Especially for people new to the program.
For sure.
That the higher power doesn't have to be anything specific.
No.
It could be whatever works for you.
Exactly. As long as it helps you to feel connected to something bigger than yourself.
And to find that strength.
Yes.
That you need to start accepting yourself.
Absolutely.
So the document goes on to talk about the fact that self-acceptance is not a passive process.
Right.
It's not something that just happens to us.
No.
It's something that we have to actively work towards.
It's a choice.
It's a choice.
Yay.
And so the document talks about how we have to really examine our actions and our motivations, and really get in touch with our feelings.
It's about being honest with ourselves.
Right.
About taking a good hard look in the mirror.
Yeah. And I think that can be a really scary thing for a lot of us,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because we don't always like what we see.
Yeah, but you got to do it.
You got to do it.
You can't run from yourself forever. Yeah. And so the more we can face ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
the more we can accept ourselves.
Right.
Because that's all about awareness.
Yeah.
The more aware we are of our thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
our feelings, our
Right.
behaviors, the more we can start to change them.
Yeah. And so, the document talks about how this process of self-examination can be really uncomfortable. It can be. Yeah,
It's not always easy
It's not always easy.
to face our demons,
Right.
but it's necessary
It's necessary.
if we want to grow.
Right. And so, the document talks about how we have to be willing to acknowledge our imperfections,
Yeah. Our flaws.
our mistakes,
Our mistakes.
our shortcomings,
Right.
and to accept them as
Yeah.
part of who we are.
And that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not about pretending that those things don't exist,
No.
you know?
It's about acknowledging them
Yeah.
and accepting them
Right.
and moving forward.
Right. And I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up,
Yeah.
you know?
They think that self-acceptance means just loving every single thing about themselves.
Right.
But that's not realistic.
It's not.
You know,
Nobody's perfect.
nobody's perfect.
Right.
We all have our flaws.
Yeah.
And so self-acceptance is not about loving everything about ourselves. It's about accepting ourselves for
Yeah.
who we are,
Yeah.
warts and all.
Warts and all.
And so, the document talks about how this process of self-acceptance can be really liberating.
It can be.
Yeah.
And once you finally get there,
Yeah.
it's like a huge weight has been lifted off your shoulders.
Right.
You're no longer trying to be someone you're not. You're no longer trying to hide your flaws.
Yeah.
You're just being yourself.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful thing.
It is. And so the document goes on to talk about how self-acceptance allows us to accept others unconditionally.
Yeah. Which is huge.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Because when we can accept ourselves, we can start to see the good in others,
And we can start to forgive them
Yeah.
for their mistakes.
Right.
Because we've learned to forgive ourselves.
For our own mistakes.
Exactly.
And so I think that's one of the most beautiful things about self-acceptance.
It is. It has this ripple effect,
Yeah.
It starts with us, and then it spreads out to the people around us.
Yeah. And so, the more we can cultivate self-acceptance in our own lives, the more we can create a world where people feel loved and accepted.
Absolutely.
And that's what it's all about.
Yeah. So this has been a really great start to our deep dive on self-acceptance.
Sure.
And I'm really excited to continue this conversation.
Me too.
And to explore some of these concepts in more detail.
Oh, that's good.
So stay tuned.
All right. So, as we dig a little deeper into this whole self-acceptance thing in recovery, one thing that really popped out at me in this document was this connection to balance.
Oh, yeah, totally. It says, self-acceptance permits balance in our recovery. Like, what do you think they mean by that?
Well, we were just talking about how before we really find that self-acceptance, we're kind of always looking for validation from others, right? Like we're off-kilter, always looking for someone or something to prop us up.
Oh, yeah. It's like we're trying to build a house on shaky ground. That's a good way to put it, yeah. Instead of finding that solid ground within ourselves, we're looking for it in other people or in things.
Right. So we end up kind of living in this constant state of neediness.
Exactly. But when we start to truly accept ourselves, flaws and all, we don't need that constant external validation anymore. We find that sense of balance, like we're grounded in who we are.
So it's like we shift from being dependent on others to being more self-reliant.
Right. The document even says that we no longer have to look for the approval of others because we are satisfied with being ourselves.
Wow, that's powerful.
Right. And think about how that changes our relationships. When we come from a place of wholeness, not neediness, we can show up as our true selves.
It's like you can't really give what you don't have, right?
Exactly.
If we don't have that self-love, how can we truly love others?
It's that hurt people idea. If we're always battling with our own self-worth, it's tough to see the good in others.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But when we find that inner peace, that acceptance of who we are, it's like it radiates outwards. We can be more empathetic, more understanding, more loving towards others.
Exactly. And the document highlights how this plays out in the fellowship too, right? Building those deeper connections and experiencing that real warmth and caring that comes with recovery.
Right. It's like we're creating this safety net of acceptance, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us.
Exactly. And it all starts with that first step, accepting ourselves, flaws and all.
That's so important. It's not about being perfect. It's about embracing the journey.
Right. It's about progress, not perfection.
And the document acknowledges that it takes time.
Oh, for sure. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a process.
Yeah. It even says it takes a long time to achieve self-acceptance on a deep level, like peeling back layers of an onion, right?
Exactly. There's always more to learn about ourselves.
Both the good and the bad.
Yeah, and that's where the 12 steps are so valuable. They guide us through that self-reflection and help us take that honest inventory.
And when we stumble, which we all do, the fellowship's there to remind us that we're worthy. We're not in this alone.
That's the beauty of it. We have this amazing support system to help us through those tough times.
Speaking of tough times, something we touched on earlier was accepting our addiction as a disease. How does that fit into this whole self-acceptance thing?
That's a great question. I think it's huge because for so many of us, our addiction was our identity for so long. It was our shame, our secret, our everything. It controlled our thoughts and actions and basically dictated how we saw ourselves and the world.
So accepting it as a disease helps us kind of separate ourselves from it.
Exactly. Like, think about it. If you have diabetes or a heart condition, those are things you have. They don't define who you are.
Right. It takes away that feeling of being broken or unworthy.
Yeah. We can start to see ourselves as deserving of love, care, and recovery.
And we can focus on our strengths.
Right. Instead of dwelling on the negative, we can start to appreciate those good qualities we possess.
It's like shifting from self-criticism to encouragement.
Exactly. And it's not about ignoring our flaws either. The document also talks about humbly moving away from our defects.
So it's about acknowledging them with compassion, but not letting them define us.
Right. It's about progress, not perfection.
We're all works in progress.
Exactly. We're not striving for some impossible ideal of perfection, but to become the best versions of ourselves that we can be in recovery.
That takes so much pressure off, right?
Yeah.
It allows us to focus on moving forward one day at a time with kindness towards ourselves.
Exactly. And remember, everyone's journey is different. What matters is that we're actively working towards positive change.
Replacing that inner critic with a more supportive and understanding voice.
Yes. And speaking of beautiful sentiments, the document ends with the Serenity Prayer, which I think perfectly sums up what we've been talking about.
Oh, yeah. The Serenity Prayer. That's a classic. How do you see it connecting to self-acceptance? Well, it's all about acceptance, right?
Yeah.
Accepting the things we can't change and having the courage to change the things we can and then knowing the difference.
Yeah, the wisdom to know which is which, right?
Exactly. Like, that's a big part of self-acceptance, too, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Serenity Prayer is basically saying, hey, we don't have to control everything, Sometimes the best thing we can do is just let go.
Just surrender.
Surrender to what is, accept things as they are. And that can be so powerful, especially when it comes to self-acceptance.
Because it takes the pressure off.
Yeah?
Like, we can stop fighting against reality and start working with it.
Exactly. And from that place of acceptance, real change can happen.
I love that. So, as we wrap up this deep dive on self-acceptance, what are some key takeaways you hope our listeners are walking away with today?
Well, first and foremost, I hope they remember that self-acceptance is a journey, not a destination. It's something we work on over time.
It's like tending a garden,
Yeah.
You got to weed out the negative self-talk and plant those seeds of kindness and compassion.
I love that analogy.
It takes time and effort, but the results are so worth it.
Absolutely. And just like a garden, you'll have seasons of growth and seasons where things feel kind of dormant. There'll be setbacks, moments of doubt, even times when we slip back into old patterns.
That's so true.
Yeah.
We're not aiming for perfection here, just progress.
Right. And when those setbacks happen, it's about learning from them and moving forward.
And remembering that we don't have to do it alone.
Exactly. We have the 12 steps to guide us and the fellowship to support us every step of the way.
That sense of community is so important, isn't it? Knowing that we're not alone in our struggles, that there are others who get it.
It makes all the difference.
It really does. Sharing our experiences, celebrating our victories, and supporting each other through those tough times. That's what it's all about.
That's the heart of the fellowship right there.
Something we keep coming back to is accepting our addiction as a disease.
Right.
I think that's such a powerful concept for anyone new to recovery.
It really is. That's like a light bulb moment for a lot of people.
Because it allows us to see our addiction as something separate from ourselves.
Exactly. It's not who we are. It's something we're dealing with.
And that separation opens up so much space for self-acceptance because we're no longer defining ourselves by our struggles.
Right. We can start to see ourselves as worthy of love and recovery and a bright future.
That's the ultimate goal, isn't it?
Yeah.
To live a life that's fulfilling and meaningful and free from the grip of addiction.
Absolutely. And self-acceptance is the foundation for that new life.
It all starts there.
It does. It's the foundation for everything. Strong recovery, healthy relationships, a sense of purpose and belonging.
So for our listener out there who might be struggling with self-acceptance, what's one piece of advice you'd offer them?
Be patient with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
This is a journey. It's not a race. There will be ups and downs, moments of clarity and moments of doubt. But through it all, remember that you are worthy of love, acceptance, and forgiveness.
That's beautiful. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. Reach out to your sponsor, connect with your fellowship, find those people who can support you on this journey.
And don't underestimate the power of the 12 steps. They can truly guide you to a life beyond your wildest dreams.
Keep working the program, keep reaching out, and keep believing in yourself.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this has been such an insightful deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listener, keep exploring this concept of self-acceptance. It's a lifelong journey, and it's worth every step. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.